Welcome to the Modeling in Blender workshop. Today we're going to cover the basics of creating models in Blender. And specifically, we'll be modeling teapots. For those on the stream who didn't get to see this, we'll be making a teapot kind of like this one that we 3D printed after a test. And so Blender is a very, as I mentioned to the people in the room, Blender is a big piece of software. There's tons of different tools you can use for it. Animation, rendering stills, game assets, VR, everything. And today we're just going to bite off a tiny chunk of this by doing some modeling. And so everyone said that nobody had any experience with Blender before. So has everyone started up Blender yet? If you haven't, go ahead and just do that. Awesome. This is what you see when you open Blender. It is primarily a 3D animation software, which means it's good for doing things like modeling characters for movies or for game development. And a lot of its workflows kind of focus on those. You can use it for other things like designing parts and things like that. And I can go over that if we have time at the end or people have questions about that. But that's kind of its workflow. And it has kind of a reputation for being a scary piece of software. That is primarily due to older versions of the software, right? So in the last 2 or 3 years, they've done huge upgrades. First with the 2.8 update, and now with the 3.0 updates. And apparently there's a 3.1 that came out earlier this week, which some of you may have installed.
I have that now.
Yeah, awesome. It's great for, actually it's good for Apple. It's a huge update for Apple. Otherwise the UI is about the same, so don't worry if it's different than mine. But yeah, they keep updating it all the time. But in these last versions, they've done a ton of user update or UI updates, which make it much easier to get started in. And part of that scariness of Blender is that it relies heavily on key commands, which, as I mentioned, the heavy end on the 3-button mouse. And so when you get started and you don't start with those tools, historically it's been really hard to do anything. Even the biggest complaint used to be that how do I select objects? Literally that was kind of hard. And they've worked those kinks out. It's gotten much better. But yeah, and so and there's a lot of other UI things. And now the new UI, it keeps all those key commands. So if you get good or you knew them in the past, or if you want to learn them in the future, they're there. And I definitely recommend taking them on as you learn. Using the key commands is great for speed. It just makes your workflow easier. Kind of the same way that knowing Command C and Command V and Word is good, right? But there's ways to do it without it. And so I would sort of do one chunk at a time. I will say that I kind of am embedded in the key commands now. So, but today I'm going to try to not use them in most cases, or at least show you how to not use them. If you catch me doing them, just raise your hands how did you do that? The other thing to keep in mind is that I'm going to broadcast my keystrokes up here, so you can see when I type an A up there, you can see that I'm typing. So you can see what the key command is too. Just keep that in mind too. So let's get started. The first thing is we want to look around a little bit. So actually let's do one thing. I'm just going to show you one thing. I said I'm not going to use the key commands, but if you want to follow along with the key commands, most of the key commands use a full keyboard, right, which includes a numpad on the side. If you want to emulate that, you can. And if you go to Edit, Preferences, and you'll get this window, and then there's Input. And you can do Emulate Numpad. And what that will do is, instead of using the digits and numbers on the numpad over here, it'll use the digits right above your keyboard. And you're probably thinking well, why don't they do that to begin with? They actually use those have key commands too for less used features. But what it'll do is, so if for instance, like it says numpad 0, now the normal 0 will, if you click emulate numpad up there. So I'm just going to turn that off for me, but if you want to follow along without the full keyboard,
and that's primarily for laptop users?
Yeah, a laptop or whatever, any keyboard that just doesn't have all these extra keys on the side. Also, there is an emulate 3-button mouse, which I think allows you to do mouse clicks with Alt and left mouse to get the other buttons. But I have to say the numpad is actually pretty easy to deal without. The 3-button mouse is pretty useful. So, the trackpad gets to be hard quickly. It's just hard on your hands. Mm-hmm. All right, so here's the viewport. How do we move around in here? How do we look around? The first thing to kind of just understand about Blender is using the keys to look around. Obviously, left click selects. This was not, I guess I shouldn't say obvious because that wasn't always the case, right? If you want to pick things. There's a few objects in the scene. We'll talk about those in a second. But if I just want to turn around, if you hold down the scroll wheel, middle mouse button, and drag, you can turn around. It's like this, right? You can look around your scene. You can also, if you are using a trackpad, you can use up to this little widget up here that's got X, Y, and Z on it in colors. If I click and drag in there, I can also rotate there with just the left mouse button. So that's good if you're viewing on a laptop. You can just use that to look around. While I'm up here, this is kind of your axis guide, and it's useful for choosing different views. So if you want to see, one of the things you do in 3D is that because we're looking in 2D, we want to look around all the time as we work, look at it from different angles. And so if you want to see, say, from the front, you click the Y, and that'll show you the front view of, or actually this is the back view, I think. Yeah, there's the front view. Super confusing. Is that, right, the Y-axis of the, here, if I go at you, the Y-axis is this green line, right? So if I click on the green line, that'll align that Y-axis to that angle. And the same with the X to look at from the side. And you can see up here what it's giving you. This is the right view. It's hard with a cube. They all look the same. But, and then Z is the top. So just so you're thinking about when you're moving in Blender, some programs do this differently. Y is going backwards and forwards in space in the view. X is going left and right, and Z is up and down. So just so you know. What other moves? We can also move around a couple other ways. So if you just want to kind of move to the side, if you hold down Shift with the middle mouse button, you can move sideways. And you can also use this hand tool to do that. So if I click on the hand tool and start dragging, it does the same thing. Right? So there's lots of ways to do things, which is useful. If I want to zoom in, just use the scroll wheel, right? Do that either zoom in or zoom out. And you can also do that with this magnifying glass. If I click inside, just like the hand tool, and then drag, you can go, I think it's up and down, yeah. Then you can zoom in too. So there's lots of ways to kind of move around.
That is so much easier than it.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, if this software frightened you in the past, it hopefully will be better now.
It's a dream now.
So we can move around. And then I'm just going to show you this last one. This last view is what's called the camera view. If you are producing for 3D animation, the camera is the angle at which it views your scene, right? And you can see here everyone see this box right here? This is the camera that's set up in the scene. Usually there's a primary camera in the scene. You can have multiple cameras, but usually only rendering to one at a time. And the primary camera, and when I click on this little camera, it looks like an old film camera, it will show me the angle from that camera. And this box shows you what is in the camera's view, right? So anything in the gray area out here won't be rendered, right? So that is also useful if you are doing that view, is that you can kind of see what it looks like from that angle. you can also get to that by hitting 0 too on the numpad. So actually, just so you know, on the numpad, that is primarily for all these different views. So if you do the emulation, or 0 kind of gives you the camera view, or it should. Let's see here. 1 is front on, right? So that's with the y-axis in the front here. 3 is the x-axis, so that's right view. 7 is top, right? So those you can use those to quickly move between views, which is kind of nice when you're working and you just want to. That's why they're there. But that said, you can either just sort of pan around or use this axis over here too. Other parts of the screen. So there's a couple. That's the viewport. We'll talk about the tools and the stuff in a second. There's a couple other windows in here. This over here is the outliner, which is basically an outline of all the stuff in your scene, right? So in our scene, you can see there's already 3 objects. There's a camera, which we've looked at, the cube, and then somewhere in the darkness up here, there's a light, right? Which is kind of all the things you would need if you wanted to animate a scene, right? You need to have light on the subject, you need a camera, and then something to look at. So they always start with that. But this view over here is really useful kind of for finding things. Sometimes your scene gets really big. Is that a little bit easier? Yeah, it looks much better now. It's much easier to find things in here. If you want, you can rename things, right? If I double click on it, I can call it my cube. So that's useful because after you've had a few cubes, then it gets confusing. There are also collections, etc. in there. The other thing in here, I'm going to pull this out a little bit, is this is the properties panel.
Can you change the scene?
Oh, yeah, good call. Sorry for those on there. Yeah, so the property panel is down here. This is all the stuff about your scene, and there's tons of stuff. This is one of those areas where kind of all the detail about Blender starts to seep in. And so for the most part, we're not going to go into too many of these panels, but just to give you a sense of what's in here, this is, there's different things about the scene. Like this is sort of the overall settings of the scene. Things like the render engine. Blender has 2 render engines, which just affect how it makes stuff, look like real. The format of the scene, how you do essentially output. Different layers about it. You can sort of set layers to how it renders things. We might talk about this at the end if we're doing 3D printing. I use some of these settings for that, but other settings about the world. And then there's a few down here that we may use. So we'll probably look at modifiers later on if we have time, hopefully. And then there's the other ones that you often use, particularly if you're doing game development or Unity. You might do materials, right? That's like the look of an object, right? Like the kind of surface of it, not just the form of it. And textures, which is kind of basically what we call pictures in 3D. Like any kind of image is a texture. Any questions about that so far? There's tons of stuff in here, including physics, constraints, particle systems. It can do so many different things. And if you sort of take one at a time, you'll kind of build up. Let's make sure if I didn't want to mention anything else. All right, yeah, let's talk about manipulating objects a little bit. So we're going to use this. Every Blender tutorial I've ever seen, the first thing they do is delete this object. We're going to use it. It'll be a nice place to kind of play around. So how do we move things around in here? So this is where we can start to use the tools, right? So if we want to move an object, there is a move tool over here, right? And it gives you these nice manipulators, right? So you see these arrows, and that lets you move things around. So if I grab, actually, let's start with the center. So if I grab in the center in this white circle, I can just sort of move around freely, which is nice. But one of the things about 3D that's really hard is that when I move around freely, I don't really have a good sense of like where that object is in space. Right? Like, so I'm moving it, and it's like, I think I'm moving it in 2D, but it turns out I'm actually moving it in, actually all 3 axes, because it's sort of aligned to whatever view I'm in. And I'm going to undo a little bit, right? So often when you move things, you try to move them on one axis at a time because it helps you kind of know where it is. So if I just want to move it on, say, the x-axis, I can grab that arrow, and it'll only allow me to move it back and forth in that direction. And it doesn't really matter how I'm looking at it. It still only moves it on that one x direction. Same with the y and the z. I'm going to double check one thing. I actually don't know what these do.
I think that's scale,
You know what that is? So these, there's these three little squares here in addition, and this is actually pretty useful because sometimes it's not that you don't want to move it in only one direction. You don't want to you don't want to move it, say, up. Like you only want to move it on the ground. Mm-hmm. So if you select this blue one, it'll only move it in the x and the y, but not up or down. Right, so that's actually really useful some of the time because like if you're moving something on the floor, you don't want it to be floating. Right. And the same with the green will only move in, say, I think the red and the blue arrow directions, etc. So yeah, it's that's actually really useful. There are hotkeys for this, and you do end up using them. So a big one is to use G, right, and that is like using that white circle. So if you click G and then just drag your mouse around, it'll move it around until you click again, and then it'll stop. But let's say I want to move it, and you can restrain it to a direction with that. If you click G and then Z, it will only move it up and down. Or if I do G and X, same thing, right? So that's the same thing. That's sort of the shortcut that people learn as you're going on. So there are some nice shortcuts for those. And there's even one for that plane feature, which is, I think, if like, let's say I don't want to move it in the X direction, in the like up, if I do G and then Shift Z, it's going to move it on that plane again, sort of like we were doing before. Mm-hmm. So you can do most everything. I'm kind of showing you the keyboard shortcuts, not so that you have to learn them today, but you can do most things with keyboards. Let's do rotating. Yeah. So again, there's like a nice rotate tool here. Very similarly, if I grab anywhere in the white circle, it'll kind of just do it randomly according to my view. Actually, yeah, it's not random. It's in the basically if there was a pin going straight through the screen from whatever view I'm looking at, it rotates it that way, right? So if I turn this around, you can kind of see how that is. The green arrows will just, and the colored circles will let you move it in around. So like the green one moves it like as if it's spinning on that green line, and the same for the red and the blue. Any questions so far? Is this making sense to everybody? Scaling, right? Big thing you might want to do is moving down. This is probably the only one where you often want to scale it with the big circle, right? Like you just want to make it bigger altogether. You don't want to do it necessarily in one direction. So you click and drag on the white, you get the whole thing. Or if you just wanted, like, let's say I want to make a skyscraper, I'll do it in the up and down direction. By default, most of these operate from the center of the object that's selected, just so you know. So like instead of, like, say, growing in the middle, or they grow in the middle, not like, say, like from the bottom or the top. That said, that can change. Objects can have centers that are different locations. You can change what it's moving around. I won't get into too much of that just because it adds a level of complexity, but you can change where it grows from. If you just want the top to grow, you can do that. If you guys want to know the key commands for this, S is for scale. That one's pretty easier. I think the move tool, why it's G, is it's grab. Like, I guess it grabs the objects and moves them around. But S is for scale, right? And you can do the same thing with S as you did for, if I do S and then X, it'll only go in that way, or Z, or Y. There we go. I don't know what the T does, but it's in there. Right? So there's commands for everything. Cool. So now we can move an object around. So editing, right? So we've kind of done the basics of objects, right? There's objects in the scene. Some of those objects are what we call meshes, right? That's like the character or this box or the teapot that we'll make. Some objects are like lights, right? And they don't have like any structure. They're kind of just meant to set things up. You can actually have objects that are called empties. We'll actually create kind of an empty in a second, which are just sort of like things to manipulate other objects. They're kind of useful to have like extra objects for moving things around. But for objects that are kind of material, like a mesh, I'll talk about meshes in a second, you don't always want to operate just on the whole object. You might actually want to edit the object's parts. And you can do that by changing the mode. So this is object mode, but we can go down to edit mode. And you'll see it looks a little bit different. Now you can see these points with lines. And this is basically what a mesh is, right? A mesh is an object that is made up of vertices, vertex, which then connect with lines. So here's a vertex, right? And those vertexes are connected with edges, right? So this line is an edge. And then those edges connect together to make a face, right? So one side of this object is a face. And a face is really any polygon that's usually, a face should be flat. Sometimes they're not flat, but they generally should be considered a flat surface. And any more than three or more vertices and or three or more edges can make up a face. And that's kind of what an object is in most 3D programs. The weird thing about it is that like this square isn't really solid, and I think if I go inside, yeah, like I'm now actually kind of inside, right? You can see that it's just a surface that has no thickness at all, right? It's just kind of this like balloon around which we stretch things. But you can move things around in here too. So now we can move, say, a vertex the same way we move the whole object, right? So if I use the move tool, I can grab it and pull it around. You'll see that I've actually made this, there's something kind of weirdness when I grab one, right? So I said that faces should be flat, and this is a face here. It's got these 4 points, but it's no longer flat. So like from this angle, it kind of looks like it's creating this like maybe a curved shape or something that fits all these three. But then you look at it from this angle, and you're like, oh, that's actually two different shapes. So keep that in mind, is that 3D actually tries to fool you. A lot of the ways they make things look smoother than they are is that they'll blend two faces together, and things like that happen. So like if you look at it from an angle, you can see that it's really two like triangles. But from this angle, it would be hard to tell that it wasn't just two shapes. So it's kind of one of the weird things about 3D to keep in mind. But if I don't want to make that flat, I can select more. And I'm sorry, I should show you. So to select those, I'm holding down Shift to select more than one. I should talk a little bit about selection, right? So that selects more than one. And now I can move around. What else? Yeah, so you can select those, move those around. I can select them. Also, there's a few tools, like the box select tool. Like if I want to select these four all at once, the box select normally will select what's visible, right? So if I do this, right, that looks like I've got all the parts of the cube, but if I turn it around, you'll see that the back-facing one isn't visible. And there's ways to get around that if you really want to select all the things. If you just want to select everything, you can hit A, and that will select all. And then I think Option A deselects all.
So Kelly, just for clarification, when you're selecting, you're only selecting vertices, or can you select edges and faces as well?
Yes, so you can, and that depends on the mode you're in. Okay. So like we're in edit mode, but by default you start in the vertex select. If you click on this one, you can select the edge select, right? So now like I'm only selecting lines. Right, and then I can also select face select, face select is really useful when you start to make like, we'll make some objects later, because you can just sort of grab one face and manipulate it independently.
Cool. Thank you.
What do they want to do?
Fantastic question.
So let's go. I just want to double check. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm going to show you a couple of things actually. Now that we're in face select, let's do this. Let's mess with this cube a little bit before we move on to the teapot. Hopefully, we'll have time for the teapot. I know this is a lot to come in. So I can do a lot of the things that I've already shown you, including scale. Right? I can scale this shape in one direction or another. You can rotate it, which will do some weird things to the cube. But there's a few things in edit mode that you can also do, which you can see down here, right? So when we're in object mode, we have these tools, but in edit mode, we have a whole new set of tools. And let me just show you a couple that we'll use today. So one is the Extrude Region, right? So I've selected that top face, and when I hit the Extrude button, now if I hold this plus, you'll see that it pulls out another shape on top of it, right? And I can select the side, and I can pull out a shape on the side there, right? And this is actually a common way of building 3D objects, right? Is to slowly kind of piece them together from squares. And that's actually kind of the main way we'll be working today. So what you might do is say extrude it out, and then you maybe go to scale, and you want to make it like a bigger, and then you extrude it again, make another piece, and then you scale it again, right, depending on which direction you want. Can I get center? Why is that not doing the, maybe it's this. There we go. Yeah, right? So I can kind of slowly build up an object roughly, right? It's not going to look, it's going to look a little boxy, a little bit like Minecraft or something to start, but we can get better results the more we go on. But that's sort of a simple way to get started. There's a few others in here. We're not going to use too many of these, but Inset is very useful, right? So what this does is that, unlike Extrude, it just makes a new face inside another face, right? Right. So now I can make this, and then if I do Extrude again, I can.
So Kelly, currently that's flat.
Yes. Right. Yeah. So if you look at it from this angle, right, it's completely flat. It just made a face inside a face. Did everyone see what I did there? Is that working?
Yeah.
And I can do Inset again here, right? So I'll do Inset. That'll make a face inside it, and then I can pull it out, right? Or I can actually pull it in too. Let me undo that. Let's go like this, right? If I want to make it Inset like a frame.
Yeah.
So just a few simple tools you can start to really build up objects. Any questions? Everyone managed to find out? Anyone get stuck in anywhere? Can't figure out why something's working?
I have one question that I don't know if it matters really, but what's the difference between extruding and like selecting a face or the vertices and using the move?
Yeah. So
They seem similar.
they are very similar, but here I'll show you what the big difference is. So let's move this top face here, right? So if I move this, you can see it sort of stretches those objects, right? And so that these lines move up with it. But if I extrude, it actually creates kind of like a new box on top, right? And that's super useful, right? Because then now I can extrude this side too separately.
Right, and it won't be warped or...
Yeah, right. It won't have this, or like if I did it the other way, like let's say I extruded that with this, you'd get a trapezoid, I think, right? When I try to extrude this, it'll pull that up, which maybe you want, but like it's different.
So extruding creates segments or segmentation.
Exactly. It creates a new like set of faces and edges on top of this one.
Thank you.
Let me show you, before we get to our teapot, because we can always just destroy this silly cube, let me just show you one more, which is the loop cut, which we will probably use a little bit today. So if you click on this one is a little harder to understand right away, but if I click on it, what it does is it adds new vertices to an object, right? And it does what's called a loop cut, and it considers different things a loop, right? So you can see here, loop cut is cutting around this sort of square section, right? It sees a bunch of faces right next to each other and it cuts around them, or like this one. It can go in different directions, like that. This is a pretty straightforward object. You'll see later on that, and you can see here, like it sort of considers like going around this and in here, right? So it makes a bunch of, and that's so you can cut an object in two or more than two. And that's useful for a number of reasons. One thing is like now I've got that point there. I can say scale that. So if I switch to scale, and I just want to, right, I can kind of scale that part out now because I've added a cut to the object at that point. You could also, maybe you want to delete the top points. So if I switch in here to the vertex, I could delete a bunch of these top points. B. I haven't showed you delete yet. That one, so you can go up to like vertex, delete. Yeah, mesh, delete, and then delete vertices, right? But you can also hit X, and then it'll give you this little menu, and it'll say, what do you want to delete? And I want to delete, so the most destructive thing you can do is delete the vertices. Right, it deletes all the points. That's the basis of everything. By deleting that, you basically delete any faces that are attached to it too, or edges. Or I can delete just the edges, right, and you can see the points are still there. It's kind of weird, but you might want to do that if you're rebuilding something. Or you can delete just faces, right, and now the edges are still there, but those faces that were, and you can see here, like, there was only really two faces that were completely surrounded. But like this one here, this face isn't deleted because I didn't select these two, right? So the face has to be all the vertices for it. So, but if I hit X, you can delete the faces. This is the weird thing about 3D, right? This is like not a real object. This would not 3D print well. You couldn't make this, right? Like it's now kind of this weird, infinitesimally thin object. Sometimes we talk about making objects watertight, particularly for 3D printing. This is not watertight, but this is, right? It's sealed up all the edges with faces.
And Kelly, quick question about the loop cut. Does it appears to be choosing the middle of that object? Does it
Yeah.
always cut in the middle?
No.
Can you change
Yeah, so let's go back to loop cut, and I'm just going to show you. So let's say I want to select this area here. If I click on it, it does start to create those. But now, oh wait, sorry. Why did it? That is weird. So I should be able to maybe a left click. All right, I don't know why. You do not have to always do the middle.
Okay.
Let's see what this does.
Oh, maybe that's how to move a pre-existing loop cut?
Yeah, I don't know what that is about, to tell you the truth. There is another way. You don't actually, so I often don't use a tool. Again, this is a potential keyboard shortcut. And the way I would do a loop cut normally is go up to the object and hit Control R, and you can see it does the same thing there. But now if I click on the button, I can slide it up and down where I want it, which is actually, so maybe we won't use the loop cut. I don't know why that acts differently. I'll have to figure out why that is so different. But yeah, so I can slide this up and down. You can also, if I do Control R and I want more than one, I can scroll the scroll wheel, and I could add like a bunch in there. And they also can be slid up and down a little bit. So you may or may not need that. But this would be nice if you wanted to, like, let's say I wanted to make some kind of weird shape. And I can go to face mode now, and I unselect things and I grab, every other face. I can now make something that looks kind of, some like fans of a like heat. I don't know what it is, air conditioner or something. Fins is what, not fans. Fins. Sorry. Yeah. So that's the basics of edit mode. Let's go ahead and start this Teapot before we run out of time. So let's go back to object mode, and we're just going to delete. I know we've all made some pretty sculptures. If you want to keep them, you can. You can just push it to the side. Just use the move tool and push it to the side a little bit. And I'm going to delete mine because That's okay. But if you want to keep yours, it's there. Let's go into front view. So the front view is when the Y, if you click on this, you might get Y, but there's also negative Y. So negative Y is front view. And you can see here it says front orthographic over here. I'll talk to you about orthographic in a second, but this will be like just front facing on. So if you go into that view, you know?
Yeah. This object's just so much.
How do I move the whole thing?
Oh yeah, so are you in object view mode?
Oh, I'm in edit mode.
Yeah, so go to object.
And then you can slide
Then-
it.
Oh, okay. I got
Yeah,
it.
sorry about that.
No,
Yeah, so
no.
that's really good to know, right? Like edit mode moves parts of objects, like makes you change it and shape it. Where object, you're just taking the whole thing and moving it over.
Yeah.
Everybody figured that out, how to get back and forth? I will say there is a shortcut for that that is also common. So object mode is to hit tab. So it'll toggle between the two.
Nice.
So we're in the front view. Next thing we're going to do add. And we're going to add an image. And this is where if everyone downloaded that Teapot, did everyone get?
Oh, hey.
We sent a link to everybody,
I
right?
did, yeah, there
Is
should be
it
a link
Gmail?
in the email. We sent it today, so.
Yeah, sorry, it was kind of a late.
No, no.
If it's not in the email, we have a web address short link that I can give you. You have the email?
No, so
No?
hit me up.
So if you go to brown.edu
Oh, wait.
/go /mml teapot, no spaces,
That's it?
and then hit enter.
Cool.
It should bring you to a Google Drive folder and you can download from there.
JPEG?
There it is.
Once you download that, it's probably worth also maybe saving your project. So I'm going to call mine, I'll save it in my folder here. When you start to reference other files in Blender, like images or videos or other things, they kind of have to point to them. So if you hit save, if you save your document, you should be able to, I'll call it Teapot live. Like that. Then it kind of knows where they are in relation. So
Wait.
people able to find the download file?
Found the file.
Yeah. Sorry, it's
No,
a
no,
file
you're good.
save is pretty standard for most things, right? So that saves the project.
Gorgeous.
Blender projects are called .blends. So everyone has a Teapot. Let's go ahead and do add menu. And then go down to image. And then we're going to do a reference image. You probably only see these first two. But yeah, this top one is the one we want, reference. And then go ahead and find your Teapot. It should be in the menu. The Blender UI for the file discovery is a bit different than others, but it should have all the parts, right? Like if you have, here's your desktop, all those objects. You can kind of go up a folder here, right? If you don't see your Teapot, you might want to refresh. But you click that and then hit load reference image. And now we have an object in 3D space, or an image in 3D space. This object, so if I go to camera view, it looks like it's there, but it is only for reference. I'll just show you up here is how you render an image. So if I go render image, you will see nothing. Because the reference image doesn't show up. Say if you were animating, it won't show up. So just keep that in mind when you're using this. But that's great for what we need. We're just using it as a reference to draw our picture. The other thing about this render, I'm going to import this again. I told you to go into front view to do this. If I do render, if I do add object, image, reference, and I do the Teapot again, it picks the angle that your camera is at that moment. So that could be really powerful if you had a certain angle in mind, but it could also be super confusing if you weren't expecting that. So always a good idea to pick the angle that you, like the view that you want to have that reference. So if it's a front view, You can, of course, rotate this, right? We can go in and choose what angle it's at, but it's easier to start from that. I'm going to hit X to delete my second image. I'm going to go back to the front view, so I'm going to hit on the negative Y. And let's just do a couple things. Well, this is really minor, but I'm going to hit use the move tool and just move it up so it like kind of sits on that red line. Keep in mind, we're going to use this is a 3D image, right? Like an image from a camera, right? So you can kind of see perspective. But we're going to treat this like it's like a flat outline of the teapot. So the one part that's going to be different from our view is this bottom here, right? This has some like a curvature to it, but our view is going to be flat. So I kind of want to let this curved part hang over the bottom. Not critical. We can line it up, but that's just so you know. All right, so that's set. We don't want to really mess with this anymore. So in order to do that, I'm going to go up here. And so in the outliner, you've got some options on your object. So this empty is our reference image. I'll call it teapot image. So that empty thing, and you can see it's got a little picture icon. And I can turn it on and off when we want to. So now you can't even see it in the viewport with that little eyeball. If I go up to this little funny funnel shape thing, I can also choose some other options. So I'm going to hit this little arrow one. I wish this was on by default, but it's not. Look at that arrow. And now I can kind of lock the object. So I can't select it, which is super useful because we don't really want to select it. It's just a reference. So that's there. We've got a few more minutes. All right, so let's try to make us like a teapot super quick. So we've got our reference image. Let's make another add, and now we're going to do a mesh. Right, a mesh is just like that cube that we created, and instead of adding a cube, we're going to add a cylinder. You can see that right there. And if I use the pan tool, I can kind of pan up a little bit. So we're going to move this up a little bit, right there. And then we can't see both of these things at the same time, which is kind of frustrating. So there are other views, right? So this is what's called solid view, right? So you can see solid objects. But we can also do wireframe, which is right next to it. So up here, everybody see up here these four circles. So you can see now the solid objects are just their edges, no faces. There's also this material view, which doesn't look too different from solid, but it uses some lighting, and if there was images, it would probably use the image in it, or a texture, I mean. And then there's rendered, and this is what it should look like with the lights and everything as it would normally. But really, we're going to stick between the solid view, which is what we started, and the wireframe. But so you can see the wireframe, I can now kind of see the image at the same time. All right, so I think we're ready. Let's go ahead and hit object to edit mode. So you can either hit tab or just go up to the menu. And let's make sure I'm in the vertex select. The other nice thing about this wireframe mode is now when I hit select, like the box mode to select all the vertices, so I select all those, it's going to grab everything, even the stuff in the back. So that's really nice about vertex mode, or wireframe mode. So let's go ahead and let's grab the whole thing first. And so you could either use select, you can use A to select all, or you can use the box tool and just drag it over the whole thing. If you don't want to deselect, just click an empty space. So I'm going to go back to the box tool, select. All right, and I'm just going to scale on the Z axis. So scale, and then use this, right? Because we're going to start and we're going to build this up. Make it kind of thin. And then I'm going to do move, right? And this is going to be the bottom. I'm going to zoom in, it's kind of there. And then I'm going to scale again, but this time just in, actually this is a case where I want to scale in two directions at once. So I kind of want to scale with the blue. So if I did this, it'll kind of squish our shape. So I want to scale with this blue one, right? I kind of want to line it up. So if I wanted to stay with this front view, I could do Scale and then Shift Z, right? So that won't affect the up and down, but it'll affect the left and right. Same thing as selecting that blue square. Everybody managed to get that?
But good to check, like good to move around. And
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm going to deselect and then just select the top side right here. And this is where you can kind of start to build an object. And I will say that some of the key commands might help with this. But so if I do extrude, so I've grabbed basically the top face, you can see there. And I can go up, and then I might do, actually I'm going to go, yeah, that's fine. And then I'm going to scale here, right? And I'm going to scale, yep. You actually don't, whoops. In this case, so just so you keep this in mind, if I select here, it only really does it in two directions because all those faces, they're only in two directions, right? They don't go up and down. So, so you know how I was talking about if I grab, say, this one, it'll select it that way, right? Or if I grab the blue one, it'll grab it that way, right? But if I grab it with the big one, it does it in all directions. Well, for this case, right, there's no height to it. It doesn't, all those vertexes, all those points are on the same level. Does that make sense to everybody?
Wait, could you go from
Yes,
the...
sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I was like confused. I don't really know how to explain it. Like, I have the extrude up.
Yep,
How do
that's
you do
perfect.
it? How do you do it?
Oh yeah, so then switch to the scale tool, which looks like that. Yep. And then just grab anywhere in the circle, white circle, the big circle actually, I think. No, not that one. So undo. So anywhere in that big space, yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank
Perfect. So I keep switching to this mode, but you can actually do most of this inside the front view, right? Because we kind of know this is the nice thing about a teapot, is it's the same shape all around except for the sides. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get this to about the width of this like kind of dip right here. And then maybe I'll move this down a little bit. And then I'm going to just keep doing this. So I've made one. I kind of got that so it matches the outline. I'm going to go up a little ways and scale. So I'm just going to grab in the middle here. And then I'm going to go extrude again. And scale. And then do it again. And just work my way up to the... We're going to ignore the spout and the handle for the second. We're just doing the body. Oops, didn't want to do two of those. And extrude again. Everybody is kind of seeing how to do this. When I do this, I'm actually going kind of rough. You can see that this is not really going to be a very nice round shape, and that's okay. We don't need a lot of detail. We just want the basic outline of the object. Do extrude again. And scale. And I'll just, one of the things that does make this faster when you are learning the key commands is that, right, is if I'm just using key commands, I can go extrude, scale, whoop, that again, or in both. There. Scale, extrude, scale a little bit, right? So, just gonna do one thing though. There. Right, so then eventually you'll build it up to the top, and we can ignore the lid for a second too. If you just want to get to the top of the teapot. But you can kind of see how I followed the shape of the main body in a very rough way. Is that working for everybody? And then once you've done that, let's just turn off our image for a second. I'm going to use the outliner and turn the eyeball. And we can kind of see what we've got. And you can see you've got a shape. It doesn't quite look like a teapot, but if I rotate around, you can kind of see all the parts. And there's a very quick way to make this smoother.
Oh, yes.
Everybody ready?
Yep.
Wait,
Give me a second.
actually, it's okay. I'll be soon.
Oh, you're getting there. You just got a few more. So
Yeah,
do another
yeah.
extrude.
I'll be there.
So when you're ready, go back to object mode and let me know. If people want to go a couple more minutes, I can at least kind of get you started on the rest of the shape. I know we went through.
So Kelly, as people are catching up, in general, in terms of strategy and suggestions, do you recommend starting out like the way that you did very quickly just to get the general shape, or ideally would you spend more time and have more levels and segmentations? What is your
Yeah,
recommendation?
no, I would do exactly what we did.
Nice.
So get the rough shape, and then once everybody ready, we need another second. We're
We're
good?
just getting the cup part, right? Not the lid.
Not the lid.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so very quickly we can smooth this out, and that's by adding what's called a modifier, right? So if we're in object mode, this is where we go back to this enormous menu over here, but we're looking for the one with the wrench, the blue wrench. And you'll see this says object mode. So make sure that your cylinder is selected. And actually, I'm going to rename my cylinder. I'm going to call it Teapot because it makes more sense. Right, so I've got my Teapot selected. If I add a modifier, there's a ton of modifiers in here, and they do all kinds of different things. You can see that they have physics ones that make things turn into oceans and all kinds of craziness. But we're just going to use one that's called should be generate, I think, isn't it? Where did it go? Is it?
Geometry nodes?
Hold on a second. Let me make sure I've got the whole. I just opened up Creative Cloud. Add modifier. Oh, they're hidden. My screen is small. Subdivision Surface.
Oh, huh.
If you click that, suddenly it kind of rounds off and like sands your object.
Twice.
Yeah, and if you want to do it again, you actually can see in here, this is how many times it subdivides your object. So what it does is take all the faces and cuts them into one square becomes 4, but it also kind of smooths it and rounds it as you do it. And you can do this levels thing over in the modifier now. I can increase it, right? And so suddenly this looks very smooth, right? There's 2 settings in here. One is viewport and one is render. That's because the more levels you add, the more hard it is on your computer to process it. So sometimes people do like only a couple in the viewport, and then when they're finally ready to animate their project, they'll go to render. So our cases, we could probably just do as much as you want. But yeah, so that creates an object, and now we have this nice smooth shape. But it's a little weird, right? It doesn't quite match our shape. I'm going to bring the Teapot image back up. There's a few areas, like maybe at the bottom here, where we want it to be less rounded. And now we can kind of go back in and add a little sharp detail. So if I go back to edit mode, and this is where that loop cut is really useful. And I'm going to say, let's learn this keyboard shortcut, because the one in the menu didn't work quite right. But if I hit Control R, you can see it starts to make a loop cut. And as I drag over, and make sure you are in edit mode. And now I click once, and then I can kind of choose this. And you can see that as I pull down, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see better. So as I add this loop cut, it changes how that subdivision surface works. And so as I bring 2 points together, you can see that now my base is a little bit sharper than it was before. And if I want to do, there's probably, maybe up here, I want to do the same thing, right? So Control R, and you kind of have more of a lip now.
Now, it's changing that shape because you have the subdivision modifier, right? Like,
Right.
it
And
wouldn't normally do that on its own
exactly.
without the modifier.
Yeah, right. It applies the modifier on top of all the. But if you think about what this modifier is doing, if it's cutting this big area in half,
Yeah.
the reason it gets sharper here is it's actually cutting this tiny area in half, right? So you get even more detail holding there. There's one other way you can also sharpen at the edges. Sometimes what I'll do is if I should show you I did that, but here I'm going to move one. I'm going to use the box select over here. So I've got the top, and I think it's actually in here. Bevel, right? So now I can kind of make a beveled edge here, and so that also helps with that modifier. Bevel. Oh yeah, did everyone see that? So I grabbed an edge. Actually, you can use a bevel anywhere, but I grabbed the top. And bevel looks like this kind of like house with like a sort of bent top here. And then when I pull it out, you can see it makes these shapes. One thing we didn't talk about either is that when you do a tool like bevel or scale even, you'll often get this little window in the corner. Over here, you can see it says bevel.
Mm-hmm.
And for a second, before you do anything else, you can control how that thing you did just works. So for instance, I can affect the amount in here if I want to be super precise for some reason. But more importantly, there's other options you can do. So like maybe I want to like make this 2 or 3 so it's kind of more rounded. So, and that's there for, keep an eye out for this because you will see it every time in the corner. But as soon as I click off, it goes away. So it's kind of like a one and done. So you may have to undo if you did something like that and you don't want, and it's not exactly how you want it. Everyone sees how we got that shape?
Mm-hmm.
So we're at 12 o'clock, but I would like to at least show you how to do the spout or get started on it, and then you guys can kind of explore. If I show you how to do the spout, I think you can get pretty close on the handle, although there's a little trick with that too. But let's say, so one thing I'm going to do is see how I've got lines right here? I want to have a curve right about where the bottom of the spout is. So I'm going to use that Control R for the loop cut. And I'm going to click once, and I'm going to bring that down to about where the spout ends on my picture. I could alternately probably pull that one up, but it doesn't hurt to add a few more points. So. And now, to make my spout, we can go back. If I go to face mode, right? So I'm in the edit, and then I go to face select. We can go back to how we were extruding before. So I can grab those points, and then I can extrude them out. Why does that not work? Oh, I'm sorry. I was using bevel. Let's go to extrude. So I grab the plus, and I'll pull it out, and you can kind of see it does this weird thing. And the subdivision surface does look sort of funny, right? You're sort of amorphous as we work on this. But I can select that, and then I can go move tool, maybe pull it up a little bit, right? And maybe I rotate it a little bit too, like particularly around this y-axis. And then I go back again, and I do another extrude, right? So now I've got this face, and I can kind of pull it out. And maybe this time I'm going to scale it a little bit too. And then move it up. And rotate it again, right? And just sort of slowly build up. And kind of think about these as the way you did when we were building this up, right? We're kind of rough, right? The subdivision surface does a lot of the work for us. As we build up, and I can extrude again maybe, and scale, and scale it, and move, and rotate, right, until. And not perfect, right? That looks a little weird. So now what I might, well, let me just do one more extrude to get to the top. Yeah, I'm going to rotate that. And that actually needs to scale out a little bit. That way. So a little weird looking for sure, right? So, but now this is where you might kind of do a little bit more work. So let's go back to, I'm going to go back to the wireframe. I think we were in solid. Now we're in wireframe. This is, sometimes the wireframe is a bit much, but, now if I use my vertex mode, and I just sort of select the ones I want. So like I want these, so to be, box select here, select a few, and then hold down shift, select a few more, and then I might pull these kind of where I want them, right? So like, not quite right. Maybe I'll rotate them a little bit. Scale. Maybe this bottom one, that's too contorted, so I'm going to pull it out a little bit and scale it. Everybody get how this has started working? Does this make sense? It does take some practice to get good at this. There's a few more sort of tricks that like help speed it up. So for instance, a trick, if you hold down Option, here we talked about loop cut, right? So loop cut does in between. If I hold down Option and select, say, this line, it's called a loop select, and it kind of selects all those in that row there. So that's kind of useful for like, now I'm going to pull this so it matches this better. And I can do loop select here. So that's a faster way to select things than just doing the box select or individual points. So, yeah.
Is there a way to like merge faces or something, or to turn two faces next to each other to like become one face?
Yes. Yes. So, so you can merge vertexes, and you can dissolve faces. So let's talk about that a little bit. So go back to solid. So let's say let's say you want to merge these two right next to here. So I could, if I select this line here, so I grab the two endpoints, and then I do, if I hold down X, it actually gives me a bunch of options. And one of them is dissolve edges. So what that'll do is just that edge that was between the two, it dissolves, and now this is one big face. You can also do things like if I want these two to be the same point, I can do mesh edge vertex maybe. Where is it? This is where I have trouble finding the menus. So actually faster, can't find it, M. That's for merge. You can see at the top it says merge. And then you can choose how to merge them. You can do the center or by distance. Let's not have to talk about, that's different. So at center or near wherever the cursor is. Probably at center is what you want most of the time. And it took those two vertexes, and then all the points that were connected to them are all merged into one. What are you trying to do?
Oh, I was thinking, because as I was making the spout, I was finding it like, I guess like I forgot to like select one half of like the faces.
Oh, like the back or something?
Right, yeah.
Actually, there is a trick for that. So that's a really good point, right? So like if I select this point and like pull it out, right? Probably with a 3D model, I'd want this to do the same thing over here because of symmetry of a teapot. So there is some really nice, let me turn off the image for a second. So when you're working that way, so like when we're working on this side, and let's say we want to adjust the way this works, like this is kind of flat, right? Probably I want the spout to be rounder. So if I select symmetry on this little thing up here with the, like this looks like a butterfly, is symmetry. And it's a pretty amazing tool. So if I click the Y, that will get symmetry along this green line, but centered at this red line, right? So now when I select an object on this side, or not, I'm sorry, maybe it is the X. So try that. Yeah, maybe. Let's try that again. There it goes. Right? right? So now I can do, it'll affects the back and the front the same way. Maybe there's something wrong with this because I messed with something. You know what? I think, here, let's see if I think I may have slightly moved that shape somehow. Let's see if that works now. So I select this and I move it. So I think the way it works, I must have messed with this somehow, and you probably already did this too, so you might have to start over. Like this point here is at the exact point as this point here on the other side. So when I do that symmetry thing, it sees it. I think what happened is maybe I moved this side without moving this side, and so it doesn't know to do that to both sides.
So it has to be like already symmetrical for it to count as
Yes.
symmetry. Okay.
Yeah, I will say this, that sometimes what people do is there's actually a modifier that's like a mirror modifier, and you'll like, basically what you do is you delete half your object. Yeah, you can see this here. Yeah, so if you start out with a symmetrical object, for some reason I must have twisted it in space. If you start out with a symmetrical object, you can continue to keep the symmetry. So normally you would turn that on when you have like a circle or a cylinder that's already that way. So we've gotten like 50 minutes over. I'm happy to stay and talk or show you guys how to do the handle if you want.
Kelly, maybe before that, could you just show people how to export it for actual 3D printing? Like
Yes.
use export to STL or OBJ?
Yes. So there's a couple ways to do that. So let's turn this off for a second. So let's say I've got my wonderful teapot. If you go to File, Export, STL, you can do that. The trick is, so this is going to export this. You want to do selection only most of the time, right? Like if there's other objects in the scene, you wouldn't want to export it. If you are doing gaming and you're creating like a scene, then you might want to export the whole thing for Unity. And there's actually so export for STL is great for making 3D prints. STL is the format that most 3D printers use. But you can export as a bunch of things. And you've done enough, I don't know if you've done enough Unity, you probably know what you might want. But like OBJs are good for sort of often for characters and objects. There's actually one in FBXs, kind of get the whole scene. This is for,
can include animations.
right, exactly. And this is, I think, a common web format. So there are other ways to export for different use cases, but File, Export, and then STL. There is also an add-on for 3D printing, which I use mostly just to export one object. But if you go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, there is a printing 3D print toolbox, which I have on. So actually you can see it if I pull it up here. And then you can just export that way. It has these other features, which I have used in the past, but not recently. But they are kind of useful for 3D printing for making sure that it actually works. How are people doing? Do you want to quit? Do people want to see how to do the handle? Handle? Okay.
We'll also be sending a recording, so
Yeah, if you want to catch it later, that's totally cool. So to do the handle, there's a couple ways. We could do something similar to the way we did the spout. We could kind of pull out maybe 2 ports at the top and bottom and then connect them. But I want to show you just a new technique that's another modifier. So let's go back to the front view, so the -y. And then I'm going to turn the image on so I can see the handle of my picture. And if you make sure you're in object mode, and then we're going to do add mesh. This time we're going to add a torus, which, torus is just a fancy donut. And it makes a torus right down here at the bottom. And again, remember how I said there's a little menu? See, when we added torus, it added this little thing. So let's click on that. And we're just going to set some settings about this torus. So first, I want to rotate it 90 degrees along the x-axis, right? So the x-axis is the red line, so I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees on that axis so we can look face on.
Wait, how do we get that menu?
Menu. So the second after, so are you in object mode or edit mode?
Oh, I'm in edit mode.
So let me get you out of there quickly.
Oh wait, I'm in object mode now.
Oh, that's cool.
Right?
You're getting a very, like, I actually kind of want to see this Teapot.
No, me too. I want it so bad.
Now everyone has to come look.
Sorry, I didn't mean to, like-
No, it's
What?
great. It's a hot mess
Whoa.
in the best way.
I kind of love it though.
No,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
my favorite thing
It's
now.
so awesome. We definitely have to print this.
Yeah, I really
It's
want
giving me
to.
Teapot Pokemon Rubber Ducky.
Yeah. It's
The
giving
new
me a
starter
Kirby
is
vibe, like Kirby swallowed a teapot,
Yes!
right?
Yes. Kirby Swallow. Kirby Workshop. Kirby Swallow and Teapot.
So to bring that to the next level, let's add one more torus. So right after you hit add torus, a mesh, or like add mesh torus.
Wait,
You'll-
wait,
So go up to the add menu.
wait, it's like my torus. But I already.
Oh yeah. Oh, let's make a new one. We'll consider that like an addition, like a base.
Okay.
So go to
Pool floaty.
Perfect. Yeah, this view. Let's do shift, and you can put this
Shift?
wherever you want. So I'm sorry. Go to add. Go to
Add.
add menu, mesh, very top.
Okay,
Yep.
okay.
Torus. And now you can see that little tiny add torus menu.
Oh, okay.
Perfect.
Thank
Gorgeous.
So I rotated it 90 degrees. So I went down to rotation X 90, just so it's like upright in that front view. And then I can use the location, the X, and maybe the Z. So I'm going to go X up, move it over to the right. And Z, I don't want to mess with the Y, so I'll leave the Y at 0. And move it to about where I want it. And then there's two radiuses on here in these settings. This is major radius and minor. So let's start with the major and just bring this, basically gets it so it's about the size of that shape. And you can do this to your liking. I'm just trying to match the photo right now, so there's no right answer here. And then I'm going to move the minor radius so it's thinner like that too. So now we have that nice circle. And you want to say something?
Yeah, I just out of curiosity, so that's setting up the major and the minor radius. Like, everything you did with moving it and all of that stuff, that can be done using the move tools we've already seen.
Yes.
But that major, minor radius, that's a one-time shot. right?
Yeah, exactly.
Got
That's
it.
actually really critical.
Okay.
The only reason I did the move and the move and the rotation now is that
Why not?
is so I could line it up.
Yeah, that makes
But-
sense.
Yeah, those I could have done later, but if I wanted a certain thickness of this torus, I had to do that in here. And once I click off, so I'm going to do that now. Like I can't really change this without sort of just editing the way we edit everything else.
Faces and all
Yeah, so I'd have to kind of like figure out how to do it, and it would probably be time consuming. With something like a torus, that would actually be kind of a pain to do. And I might just do one other thing is that while we're in object mode, is I'm going to use the scale tool and just scale along that green y-axis, so that because it's a little wider, right? Let me turn this image off for a second. You can kind of see, right? Now, if you want, I won't go into this right now, but you could also do sort of the same way we manipulate stuff in here. You could kind of pull parts of this and like so it matches. But I think for now I'm just going to go with the circle. But you could pull this bottom part out so it matches that. In edit mode, right? Like in edit mode, I'd go in and I'd edit the faces. But we're just going to like plunk this right onto our teapot. So I'm going to go. Let's turn the image off for a second. So we're going to rename the torus handle, so I know what it is. And then, actually, I'm going to turn the handle off so you can't see it, because that'll just make it easier in a second. And I've got my teapot, so I'm going to add a new modifier. Add modifier Boolean. And the Boolean is like for like Boolean logic, right? Like making two like merging two objects or cutting one object out of another. So like the default here is difference. That's like basically cut one object from another. But we're going to do union, which will take the handle and the teapot and merge them into one. So if I click union and then I pick this little thing here is the object. So I click in there, and we don't have much in our scene. So the only thing we can use as an object is the handle. Even though it's turned off, it'll still show up in here. So once I click that, now that is actually the teapot, right? I turned the handle off, right? So now I've just combined those two shapes.
Gotcha.
Another thing just to keep in mind while we do this is that you'll notice that like that's all rough and this is smoother. That's because these modifiers are in a certain order. So it does the subdivision and then the Boolean. But you can actually just drag these out of order and now that'll be smooth too.
Right?
I was gonna ask.
I was just like,
So, yep.
majestic.
All right.
Any questions? That makes sense? Have you made it cooler? Oh, you have.
Oh, yes.
I have one question about what you just did.
Yeah.
If you had a modifier on the handle, like whether it was the subdivision or something else, before you did the Boolean,
Yes.
does
That
the
applies it?
teapot then get those? Yeah. Is it
Yeah.
a parent-child relationship?
It totally is. Yeah. So if I go back into the handle and let's add a,
Octopus-like
Right?
things.
I
I don't know, simple deform like that, right? So I did the,
That's so fun. Wait, that's so cool. How'd you do that?
Oh,
I was-
that's
I had-
way cooler.
That is
Yeah,
way
how do you do
cooler.
that?
I had the same question too. I was like, is it a parent-child? That's because if so, that's way easier for like editing individual
right.
parts.
Yeah, you can do the parts and
But
then put
keeping
it
them
together.
Ah, man.
So-
That's so cool.
If you want to see how to do this, this is a new modifier. So in the handle, I did what's called a simple deform. So add modifier simple deform. And it's this kind of weird thing where you basically twist the shape and you can pick, like, so this did it, I guess, on the X, but I could do it in the Y or the Z. Do you like that? Z does nothing. I don't know. But, and you can also kind of, and there's other options here. So that's twist. I will say this twist is pretty cool. And the most successful 3D print I have ever made that like people really like is I think this modifier. Because if I just take this number and go a lot, well, actually maybe let's try a different angle. I don't know.
Oh, I see. Z is just rotating it so hard that you can't even see it.
Yeah, but like you
Okay.
can. I think it's this modifier, and I basically made it into like a Dairy Queen. It just zipped up into a spiral. So
But my question is, if you go back to the teapot, right?
ooh, that's weird.
Oh, that's
Oh, hello.
That's
Hello.
deeper.
Oh, I like that. But if you go back to the teapot, is the teapot going to be affected by that simple deform?
Yes.
Oh. But only the piece that it's editing. So only the handle is affected, but it
Right.
applies to it being merged.
subdivision was applied to the handle.
Yes.
So what is
It's
so,
like a layering thing, I think.
Okay, so the
is what
first
I'm seeing.
object that you select in the Boolean is the parent.
right? So
Yes.
it takes and it takes
Yep.
So the handle, like we did a bunch of stuff to the handle, and then the teapot is then takes whatever state that the handle is in and pulls it in, and then it does whatever it wants underneath.
That's dope.
Right? That's so much more clever. Same.
I will say, so you added a torque. This is one thing to keep in mind is that when in edit mode, you can add shapes too, right? So I can go add but you see it's less, like I can't add a light or a camera or other weird things, but I can add other meshes in here, right? So you can have other meshes that are like kind of all part of the same mesh.
Oh wow.
And clearly like the subdivision did some weird thing to that part.
And then there's that hollowing out thing. Like,
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
And so I will say that for most purposes in 3D, VR, gaming, animation, it doesn't matter. For 3D printing, it's a little weird to have multiple meshes because the printer might not know what is the solid object. So, but for any kind of digital purpose, that you can just make things go inside.
So for something hollow like this particular teapot, is there a way to very quickly make a new
You make that inside.
Yeah, make
There
that
is a way.
inside, but also have it still. Give it a little
I will
thickness.
schedule this workshop in the future for an hour and a half because I think you're asking all the questions that we were meant to. So, oh, and you can see here. Here's a fun thing that I did, right? So I did that bevel, and I forgot to select half the sides, right? So like
Gorgeous.
it did the bevel on the front and then didn't see this. So that's like something to keep in mind. I do this all the time, so it's easy mistake. Let's see if I can make up for that with this object. So I'm going to do an inset. Just so I have a clean circle now. It's kind of messed up here because
Yeah.
there's something going on with this, but let's see. Go one. All right, yeah. So that's okay. So what I'm gonna do to like get that hollowed, and this is how I made that one, is face select. Right, so I want to grab that,
Mhm.
and I'm just gonna X and then delete faces.
Great.
So now that's hollow.
Mm-hmm.
But this is paper thin, so there's no, and the printer will not like that.
Nope.
And then we'll do the same. Let's say we want to do the spout too. Yeah, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do an inset a little bit. And that changes the shape a little bit. And then same thing with delete faces. So now I have kind of a weird, so like basically it's hollow with all the parts you would need for a teapot.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another modifier. So add modifier, solidify. And that doesn't look like much. But there's actually a small thickness to it. So I do 0.03. You can see there. There's actually it thickened
Yeah.
that, so it made the inside edge.
Okay. Okay.
And you select 0.03 because that's the size of our printing nozzle?
So that is entirely arbitrary. That's in 3D printer world. In fact, if we try to export this into Blender now, it'll be like, are you using inches? What is this crazy size? So if you are doing 3D printing, I like to change the units. So the scale in Blender is set up for like meters because it thinks like you're making human scale objects.
Mm-hmm.
But 3D printing is usually millimeters.
Okay.
So this is a little weird, but I'm setting this to 0.001. This is not necessary. You could always scale it in the, like when you print it,
Mhm.
but this is if you want to kind of try to match. So 0.001, right, that's like a millimeter is 1,000th of a meter. So that's why I did 0.001. And then you can actually change the length here 2 millimeters, so it just matches. And now there's a couple of things I can do. So this over here, there's a menu item. You can see this is the size of my object, which is tiny, right? So I probably want to scale this up for 3D printing to like at least 10 times that size. That's better, right? That's like something 3D printable. But also now if I go back to my Solidify modifier, you can see that's what it is. So that's really too thin still. So that gives you a better sense. If you want, like the nozzle is 0.4. So I would do at least 0.8 and probably like 1 millimeter thick.
2 perimeters, right?
Oh, that looks crazy. Oh, you know what? The other crazy thing you have to remember when you're doing modifiers is I right-clicked. Nope. Object. Apply. Scale. Let me just show you what the difference is. This is a 34 millimeter object. This is the actual size of it in the space.
Okay.
But it's basically saying that it's a small object that I scaled up.
Got it.
So this I want to be apply it. So if I do object, apply, scale,
And then it brings down to 1.
1. And now I think this should be point. Yeah, that's a little weird, but all right. It's probably still kind of small.
Did it completely close up the spout?
Not
Oh, no.
completely.
Okay, cool. I just couldn't see it.
Yeah, not completely, but yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's actually good because that happens a lot of times when you download 3D objects. Like they say that it's to scale, but they didn't apply the scale, and so then like you think you haven't imported it into your slicer, and it's like it's a spec.
Yeah.
You just have to like zoom in until you see it, and then
yeah,
scale it up. Yeah, that's annoying.
yeah. And I could, I might actually make a quick video on that part too. 'Cause
I think that would be
that's
really
totally useful for setting that up. There's a few other things I actually usually set up. Something in here. Yeah, this I do. So now those little squares are centimeters. So
Yeah.
it kind of gives you a sense of reference. But
Oh my god, I'm so annoyed right now.
annoyed.
Well, because so there was a project that I was doing, and I was using the Solidify thing, but I was using it incorrectly. I was not using it the way that you just demonstrated. And had I known how to use it correctly, this project would have gone so much. I mean, this was like years ago. This was
Yeah.
like 6 or 7 years ago.
Well, it's hard
so
because
easy.
there's a ton of detail in there, and they keep developing it, but then sometimes it's hard to catch up on like what
Yeah.
exactly it all does.
Yeah. That's
And
really
there's
cool.
there's little things like that, right? Like that kind of makes sense, but if you didn't apply the scale or do other things, like well, it's half a meter, like that's
Yeah.
So
Don't ask a
great,
question.
thanks.
Awesome.
That's so cool.
This all makes so much more sense to me.
Oh, good. Yeah,
Yeah,
did you guys-
like a million times more sense.
Oh, awesome, perfect. Yeah, if you guys get stuck in the future, or you have questions, or just want, okay, this is what I'm trying to do with my final project, just let me know.
I'm just gonna come harass you
yeah,
upstairs.
Come
Yeah.
harass us. That's
No,
what we're
he
here for.
literally will open the door and he's like, "Do you know what's new in Blender?" And I'm like, "No, Kelly, I don't." Why don't you I don't know, tell me or
Yeah,
something.
I really do. I really do like Blender, so feel free to ask. Great.